Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleepy Disclosure Project, a quiet corner where science, mystery and imagination are spun not as arguments, but as stories whispered slowly through the night. Here, time doesn't rush. It stretches, softens and bends into tales that carry you across centuries, or in tonight's case, across millions of years. Tonight's story is stranger than most. It isn't about what we know, but about what we might have missed. It asks whether our world has always been ours, or whether Earth has carried other civilizations long before us, that rose, flourished, and then vanished so completely that the rocks themselves barely remember. So, wherever you are, lying in bed with the lights low, walking a dark street with only your headphones for company, or driving beneath a sky full of stars, take a breath and let yourself settle. If you'd like, share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I'm always fascinated by the little constellation of voices that gather here from all over the world. And now we begin tonight's story by picturing yourself standing in a vast desert at dusk. The horizon is wide, the last of the sun bleeding into purple shadows, and the sand cooling beneath your feet. Around you, silence stretches. Not the kind of silence you find in an empty room, but a silence so vast that it presses on your chest, reminding you how small you are compared to the ages that have passed over this place. You dig your heel into the sand and think about what lies beneath. Layer after layer of stone, each one a page in a book so old we can barely read it. There are fossils of trilobites sealed in those pages, tiny armoured creatures that scuttled across the ocean floor for nearly 300 million years. To them, our story, a few 100,000 years of upright walking, a few thousand years of cities, would be nothing more than a flicker. The desert makes you feel the weight of what geologists call deep time. Mountains rise and fall here. Oceans open and close. Continents drift like restless sleepers turning in their beds. And with every shift, entire worlds are swallowed, forgotten. Less than 1% of all species that have ever lived are preserved as fossils. Imagine how many stories were erased, and yet, every so often, the Earth forgets imperfectly. A monk in medieval Ireland once wrote about a summer when the sun dimmed and crops failed. He could not have known he was describing the lingering shadow of a volcanic eruption on the other side of the world. His tiny record survived centuries, a fragile thread tying one catastrophe to another. If such human traces can last, what of civilizations before humans? If they existed, what traces might they leave? In 2018, two scientists, Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank, asked that very question. They weren't chasing myths of Atlantis or secret continents, but posing a sober thought experiment. If an industrial civilization had risen millions of years ago, would we even be able to detect it today? They called it the Silurian Hypothesis, borrowing the name from an ancient period of Earth's history when life looked nothing like ours. The answer unsettles more than it comforts. 100 years from now, New York's skyline might still be standing in ruins. 1,000 years, and forests would cover it. 10,000, and almost everything would be gone. Push forward 1,000,000 years, and all that might remain is a faint line in the rocks, a chemical spike, a layer of plastic, a signature of carbon that shouldn't be there. Our entire story reduced to a whisper in stone. Earth has always been a patient eraser. Think of Petra, a city carved into cliffs of rose-red stone, once home to merchants and kings. For centuries it thrived, and then, when trade routes shifted, it was abandoned. Sand drifted in and buried the city so completely that it vanished from memory for almost 1,000 years. When a Swiss explorer stumbled upon it in the 19th century, locals called it the Lost City. Yet Petra is young by geological standards, barely 2,000 years forgotten. Now imagine 2 million. You glance back at the desert horizon. The silence feels less empty now, as though it holds not absence, but memory. Perhaps Earth has carried others before us, civilizations that burned brightly and were swept away in the tides of time. Perhaps their only monuments are thin chemical scars, buried so deep in the stone that we will never recognize them. And if that is true, then our history is not the first chapter, but only the latest one. Close your eyes for a moment and let your mind slip backward. Not decades, not centuries, not even thousands of years. Keep going, past the pyramids rising on the Nile, past painted caves glowing with firelight in France, past the moment when Neanderthals watched their last embers fade in the dark. Push deeper, beyond the thunder of mammoths on frozen plains, beyond the first flowering plants, beyond the asteroid that ended the age of the dinosaurs. Keep moving back until human history feels like the brief spark of a match in a cavern, stretching into endless black. Now you find yourself not thousands, but hundreds of millions of years ago. The air is heavier here, thick with oxygen. Insects dominate the skies, but they are nothing like the tiny gnats and flies you know. Dragonflies with wings wider than your outstretched arms drift through the swampy air like living kites. Below them, forests stretch endlessly, made of plants that look familiar and strange at the same time. Towering trees without true leaves, bark thick and primitive, roots groping through mud that squelches with the sound of unseen creatures. Amphibians the size of crocodiles bask on the banks, their wet skins glistening in the humid air. This is Earth, yes, but it feels like another planet. Geologists call this kind of imagining deep time. To them, the Earth's history is not a line of years, but a slow breathing, where continents drift like restless sleepers turning in bed. Mountains rise and collapse. Oceans open, swallow land, and close again. Everything we think of as permanent is, in that frame, temporary. A mountain range that takes your breath away today might be nothing more than sand grains scattered across the ocean floor in another 100 million years. Try to place yourself in that rhythm. If the entire 4.5 billion years of Earth's history were compressed into a single calendar year, humans wouldn't appear until the final minutes of December 31st. The Great Pyramids, a flicker in the last few seconds before midnight. The invention of the printing press, a heartbeat, the internet, barely the blink of an eye. The rest of that vast year belonged to creatures you will never know, in ecosystems that rose and vanished with barely a trace left behind. And yet, some left their mark longer than we can imagine. Consider trilobites, armoured little beings that scuttled across the seafloor. They survived for nearly 270 million years. To put that into perspective, our own species, Homo sapiens, has been here for perhaps 300,000 years. To a trilobite, we would be the newcomers, the short-lived experiment. Their endurance makes our story look like an afterthought, a footnote in a book far larger than we've ever opened. But even those vast stretches are fragile. About 250 million years ago, Earth convulsed in what scientists call the Great Dying. Over 90% of all species vanished. Imagine it. Forests turning to ash, oceans choking on acid, skies blackened by volcanic smoke. Some researchers believe that for a time afterward, fungi ruled the Earth, feeding on the decay of a poisoned planet. Picture landscapes not of trees and grass, but of endless fungal mats. Mushrooms spreading across dead forests, strange fruiting bodies rising where no animals stirred. It's a reminder that extinction isn't just the end of a life, it is the end of memory. Whole histories can vanish, rewritten by silence, and history can vanish faster than you'd expect. Consider Petra, carved into rose-red cliffs in Jordan. For centuries it thrived as a bustling hub of merchants and kings. Then trade routes shifted, people moved on, and the desert swallowed the city. Sand drifted in, walls crumbled, and Petra slipped out of memory for nearly 1,000 years. When a Swiss explorer stumbled across it in the 19th century, it seemed like a miracle, a lost city revealed. But Petra had been hidden for less than 2 millennia. a heartbeat compared to deep time. If a city can disappear in centuries, what of civilizations measured not in centuries but in millions of years? And Petra is not alone. Across the ocean, deep in the Amazon, archaeologists are uncovering traces of vast civilizations that were thriving long before Europeans arrived. Complex networks of earthworks, canals, and towns supported millions of people. Yet when outsiders first set foot there, they found only jungle. The forest had reclaimed it so completely that for centuries no one believed those societies ever existed. And that was after only a few hundred years. The soil still carries the memory, in subtle dark patches called terra preta. But even those are easily overlooked. What these examples whisper is that forgetting doesn't take millions of years. It can happen within centuries, given the right mix of neglect and nature. If whole cities and civilizations can slip away so easily in the shallow end of history, how much more fragile are the traces of worlds that might have risen in the deep? Look back at the desert horizon. It's quiet now, but beneath your feet are not just grains of sand. There are forests pressed into coal seams, seas compacted into limestone, and the bones of creatures that never had names. If the earth has erased so much, what else might it have buried? Perhaps not just animals and plants, but something that thought, dreamed, and built long before us. The silence does not answer, but it feels less like emptiness and more like a question left hanging in the air. The more you walk backward through time, the more the scale of loss becomes overwhelming. The fossil record, for all its wonder, is mostly silence. Every skeleton in a museum, every delicate imprint in stone, represents not the rule, but the rare exception. Fossilization is a lottery almost no one wins. Entire lineages, entire ecosystems, lived and died without leaving a trace we can ever recover. Even the reign of the dinosaurs, as creatures that ruled the earth for 160 million years, reaches us only in fragments. We marvel at towering skeletons reconstructed in museums, but these are stitched together from the tiniest slivers of survival. A femur here, a tooth there, the faint outline of a feather pressed into stone. For every dinosaur we know, there may have been dozens, even hundreds, that left no record at all. And if titans of flesh and bone can nearly vanish, what chance would steel and glass have after 10 million years of erosion and tectonic churn? Geology is not a library that preserves every page, it is a recycling press. Sediment hardens into rock, then is subducted into the Earth's mantle and melted into magma. Mountains rise, crumble, and return to the sea. In that endless cycle, memory is erased and rewritten. A city left on the surface today might one day be folded into a mountain chain, its stones indistinguishable from those around it. Given long enough, even monuments meant to outlast eternity can become nothing more than dust. And yet, sometimes the Earth betrays herself with hints. In Greenland, cores of ancient ice reveal faint bands of lead, the residue of Roman smelters burning 2,000 years ago. The people who worked those furnaces never knew they were writing into ice sheets 1,000 miles away, yet their presence lingers in frozen layers like a footnote for some future reader. If we can see Rome in Greenland, what else might be hiding in the stones beneath our feet? The pattern repeats across the world. In India, the city of Nalanda once held one of the greatest libraries of the ancient world. Pilgrims and scholars came from across Asia to study there, and for centuries it thrived as a beacon of learning. But in the 12th century, invaders set it ablaze. Witnesses described manuscripts burning for months, the smoke blotting out the sky. Today, the ruins still stand, but most of its knowledge vanished forever. Imagine the weight of centuries gone in a single season of fire. And yet that loss is still young, still visible, still recoverable. Place it in the measure of millions of years, and it becomes indistinguishable. These stories remind us that forgetting is not just possible, it is inevitable. Cultures rise, create wonders, and leave marks, but those marks are fragile. 1,000 years can bury them in sand, a few centuries of forest regrowth can erase them from sight. Now stretch that erasure into tens of millions of years, and even the boldest achievements become whispers. Meanwhile, elsewhere in history, echoes of similar fragility emerge. The Mayans carved stone temples that rose like mountains above their jungles. When their civilization waned, the jungle began its patient work. Trees split masonry, vines dragged down walls, and parrots nested in hollow corridors where kings once stood. By the time European explorers stumbled into those ruins, entire cities had become forests, their memory erased from living culture. That was after only centuries. Across the globe, in China, entire dynasties rose and fell while rivers shifted course, burying ancient towns beneath new floodplains. Farmers still uncover pottery shards when ploughing fields, fragments of worlds swallowed by the Yellow River. Every piece is a reminder. Civilizations are written on water and dust. And if civilizations of stone and writing can vanish so quickly, what of those that might have existed when continents themselves looked different? Imagine a people who thrived not on familiar coastlines, but on shorelines long since dragged beneath oceans or uplifted into mountain ranges. Their cities could be sealed miles below the crust, unrecognizable as anything but rock. The unsettling possibility is not just that life existed before us, but that it may have reached intelligence, built, and fallen, leaving almost nothing behind. Perhaps a few anomalies, a sudden spike in carbon, a trace of chemicals that shouldn't be there. Linger in stone, waiting to be recognized. But perhaps not. Perhaps everything has already been erased, folded back into the deep silence of the earth. You return your gaze to the desert. The stars have risen now, sharp against the horizon. The sand is cool, the night wind still. Beneath you lie billions of years of history compressed into silence. And as you listen, the silence feels less like emptiness and more like a pause in the middle of a sentence. Because if Earth has hidden so many worlds already, who's to say she hasn't hidden more? The desert grows colder as the last traces of twilight fade. You pull your gaze from the horizon and think of the question that brought you here. If civilizations had existed before humanity, how would we ever know? It sounds like the premise of myth, the kind of tale whispered about Atlantis or Lemuria, lands swallowed by oceans. But in 2018, two scientists, Gavin Schmidt, a climate researcher at NASA, and Adam Frank, an astrophysicist, decided to treat it not as myth, but as science. They asked a question simple enough to fit on a scrap of paper. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth millions of years ago, would it be possible to detect it in the geological record? They called it the Silurian Hypothesis, half in homage to the Silurian period more than 400 million years ago, and half as a playful nod to a British science fiction series that imagined intelligent reptilians predating humanity. The name was light, almost humorous, but the question was serious. To understand it, imagine you are a geologist millions of years in the future. You're not digging through the ruins of cities. Those are long gone. Instead, you're pulling up a core sample from a stretch of stone that was once the sea floor. What would you look for? Not statues or skeletons, but chemistry. Civilization leaves fingerprints, not monuments. Our own fingerprints are already visible. In Greenland, researchers have drilled ice cores thousands of meters deep, each layer recording a year like rings in a tree. Among those layers, they have found faint traces of lead. That lead drifted from Roman furnaces 2,000 years ago, carried across Europe and into the Arctic sky before settling as snow. The Romans never imagined that their work would inscribe itself in ice, but it did. Today, scientists can still read that ghostly mark. If Rome, with its comparatively modest industries, can be found in Greenland, what of us? In only a century and a half of burning fossil fuels, we have shifted the balance of carbon in the atmosphere so dramatically that it leaves a distinct isotopic signature. Core samples in the far future will show it as a sudden, sharp spike. The mark of something that burned too much, too quickly. And that's only the beginning. plastic is already writing itself into the rocks. On Hawaiian beaches, geologists have found strange black stones flecked with bright fragments of green and blue. Sand, lava and plastic melted together by fire. These plastiglomerates are accidental fossils, part natural, part artificial, already forming a new kind of rock. If buried, compressed and preserved, they could persist for millions of years, a permanent reminder of our brief era. Other signatures are even harder to erase. In the mid-20th century, nuclear tests spread radioactive isotopes into the air. Elements like plutonium-239, which does not occur naturally, settled across the globe. Even if every reactor and weapon vanished tomorrow, those isotopes will remain detectable for tens of millions of years. Imagine a geologist in the far future pulling up a rock and finding a sudden flare of radiation that lasts only a geological heartbeat. It would be like a thin scar, a wound in time. This is what Schmidt and Frank meant. Civilizations don't endure in monuments, they endure in chemistry. The question isn't whether we will leave a trace. We will. The question is whether we are the first to do so. And here is where the thought experiment becomes uneasy. Earth's history already contains strange spikes, odd events that don't fit neatly into natural cycles. About 56 million years ago, during what is called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, the planet suddenly heated by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. The oceans acidified, ecosystems collapsed, and it took nearly 200,000 years for stability to return. The cause is still debated. Some point to volcanic activity, others to methane release from the seafloor. But to a future geologist, it might look uncannily like the signature we're writing now. Imagine standing over a core sample from that age. You see the spike, the sudden warming, the altered carbon ratios. Do you interpret it as volcanoes? Or do you wonder whether someone long before humans set fire to the world and then vanished? The unsettling part is that the answer may be unknowable. With every passing million years, the Earth grinds and folds, rewriting her own record. Even if there was a civilization, all we might ever see is the chemical ghost of its existence, indistinguishable from the scars of natural catastrophe. The desert wind sharpens, tugging at your sleeves. The stars overhead burn steadily, indifferent to the questions below. And in the silence you realize the mystery of the Silurian Hypothesis is not whether it's true, but whether we would ever be able to tell the difference. The challenge of the Silurian Hypothesis isn't only in imagining the past, it's in imagining the erasure. Think of what happens to a city when it's abandoned. Chernobyl, left empty after the nuclear disaster, is already a forest of trees pushing through cracked concrete, deer grazing in courtyards, wolves padding down silent streets. Less than 40 years, and nature has nearly claimed it back. Now stretch that to 400, to 4,000, to 4 million years. What chance would a skyscraper have? What chance would the wires, the roads, the books, the satellites orbiting overhead? The Earth would not just reclaim them, it would recycle them, grind them down until nothing remained. That is why Schmidt and Frank argued that if you are looking for signs of civilization in the deep past, you must not look for monuments, but for patterns. Industrial society reshapes the climate, the chemistry of oceans, the very sediments beneath our feet. We're already laying down a layer unlike anything seen before. Future geologists may not find our buildings, but they will see the sudden spike of carbon, the unusual metals, the radioactive dust. The unsettling question is whether those kinds of traces already exist in the record, and we have simply explained them away. Take the Paleocene-Eocene warming. To scientists today, the event is puzzling. Why such a sharp and sudden rise? Why such a prolonged collapse afterward? Volcanoes are a possible explanation, but the volume of carbon needed strains credibility. Methane clathrets, vast frozen reserves under the seafloor, are another possibility, but those too are uncertain. Some researchers note the uncanny resemblance to modern warming, a sudden release, a global fever followed by ecological collapse. Of course, mainstream science assumes it was natural, but the very fact that it is debated shows the fragility of our knowledge. If we ourselves vanish tomorrow, would future species debate our traces in the same way? Would they look at our isotopic spike and wonder whether it was volcanism or something else? Other anomalies whisper similar questions: layers of unusual metals, sudden shifts in carbon chemistry, events where ecosystems collapsed in strange accelerated patterns. They all have natural explanations, but in geology, natural explanations are often the only ones available. How could you ever prove that something artificial lay beneath? To grasp the scale of the problem, imagine you are a future scientist digging into the stone of the 20th century. You find a band rich in carbon, a flare of isotopes, tiny fragments of plastic hardened into rock. Could you know for certain that it was industry? Or would you hesitate, wondering whether it was simply a natural quirk of chemistry and chance? The hypothesis, then, is not about proving the existence of forgotten civilizations. It is about humility, about realizing that if they had existed, they would be almost invisible to us. And by the same measure, if we vanish, we too will be almost invisible to whoever comes after. Global echoes deepen the point. Across the world, stories linger of floods, fires, and lost ages. Plato's tale of Atlantis, a shining city swallowed by the sea. The Indian epics that speak of weapons of fire falling from the sky. The Norse myths of Fimbulwinter, when the world froze and gods fell. Scholars treat these as myths, and they are. But myths often rise from the soil of memory. Could they be distorted reflections of real catastrophes, of real erasures? And what of other worlds? Astronomers now search for what they call techno-signatures in the skies of exoplanets. Strange gases, chemical ratios that cannot be explained by biology alone. In other words, they are looking for the same kind of fingerprints that Schmidt and Frank suggested we look for here. Perhaps, as we scan alien skies, we are seeing our own history mirrored back at us. Civilizations leaving faint traces, vanishing and being debated by strangers millions of years later. The desert around you seems vast, silent, eternal. But in your mind's eye you see layers beneath it, not just of rock, but of questions. Civilizations may have risen and fallen here, their voices buried so deeply that we will never hear them. Or perhaps not. Perhaps Earth has carried only one, and we are it. The cliffhanger is not a paradox this time, but a reflection. Whether or not the Silurian hypothesis is true, it tells us something unsettling about our own future. Because if traces are so easily erased, then we too may one day be reduced to nothing more than a line in the stone, debated, doubted, and perhaps forgotten entirely. Imagine not the desert this time, but a frozen frontier. You're standing on the Greenland ice sheet, the air sharp enough to sting your lungs. A drilling rig hums in the pale Arctic sun, pulling up long cylinders of ice. Scientists move carefully, as if handling glass, sliding a newly lifted core into insulated sleeves. It looks unremarkable, cloudy white, flecked with tiny air bubbles. Yet inside those bubbles is the breath of ancient Earth. Under microscopes in distant labs, those bubbles tell stories. They reveal when volcanoes erupted, when forests spread, when ice retreated. They capture the soot of distant fires, the breath of mammoths, the fingerprints of human industry. And hidden in one thin band, faint but measurable, is the whisper of Rome. 2,000 years ago, Roman furnaces roared across Europe, smelting lead for coins, pipes, and amphora seals. Smoke curled into the sky, drifted north and settled as snow. Over centuries it pressed into ice, sealed away until scientists drilled it free. Today, in a sterile laboratory, someone runs a sample through an instrument and sees a spike. There it is, the rise of an empire, written not in marble or parchment, but in pollution frozen into a glacier thousands of miles away. This is how civilizations inscribe themselves into geology, not with monuments, but with chemistry. The Silurian Hypothesis asks, if Rome lingers in Greenland, what about others? What if Earth has carried fingerprints of civilizations far older, not in ruins but in layers of stone? Already our own fingerprints are everywhere. Carbon levels have surged so quickly that geologists call this moment the Anthropocene. In just 2 centuries, the burning of coal, oil and gas has shifted isotope ratios sharply enough that anyone drilling a future core will see the anomaly as a jagged spike. Long after our cities are dust, that chemical scar will remain. But carbon is not our only legacy. Along the coasts of Hawaii, scientists once bent down to collect black, porous rocks that glittered strangely in the sun. They were not lava alone, but something new. Fragments of plastic bottles, fishing nets and debris melted with sand and volcanic stone by fire. Under magnification, streaks of translucent blue and green gleam inside the rock. They called it plastiglomerate, part natural, part artificial. One of the scientists, Patricia Corcoran, described the disquieting sensation of holding it in her hands, realizing it was a new geological material, one that had never existed before humanity. And already, plastiglomerates are not rare. They are appearing on beaches around the world, from Hawaii to Portugal to the Pacific atolls where tides gather human waste. If buried, compressed and preserved, they could last for millions of years. Imagine a geologist 10 million years from now, prying a stone from a cliffside and seeing those bright flecks. Would they know it was plastic? Or would they mistake it for some strange volcanic glass, an impurity in the rock? The unsettling thought doesn't stop there. What if similar materials already exist in much older layers, their artificial origins unrecognized? Perhaps, somewhere in a forgotten collection, they already sit. A grad student once described rummaging through a university basement, finding trays of odd specimens, each tagged with faded handwriting. Some were rocks with bright seams of colour running through them, labelled unusual basalt decades earlier, then shelved and forgotten. She held one up to the light, wondering if she was the first to see it differently. How many such fragments have been dismissed, catalogued, and left to gather dust, their stories still unread? Other traces are even harder to erase. In the mid-20th century, the sky itself became a ledger. Mushroom clouds bloomed over deserts and atolls, their shockwaves flattening palm trees and test towns. A technician in Nevada squinted into the glare of 1954, holding a Geiger counter that screamed as fallout rained from the sky. He did not know it, but he was helping write one of the clearest geological scars humanity will leave. Nuclear tests scattered isotopes across the globe. Cesium-137, strontium-90, and plutonium-239. Elements that had never existed on Earth before. These isotopes will remain detectable for tens of thousands, even millions of years. A geologist in the distant future may pull up a core of soil or stone and see it instantly. A bright, thin flare in the record, a wound in time. Long after steel has rusted and satellites have fallen, the mark of nuclear fire will still burn in the Earth's skin. Even older societies left faint echoes, though subtler. In medieval Europe, blacksmiths hammered iron in smoky forges, and enough soot and metal dust drifted skyward to leave traces in Arctic ice. In China, centuries of rice farming reshaped entire landscapes, and the pollen grains preserved in sediments tell the story. In Polynesia, sailors landing on small islands lit fires, leaving behind charcoal layers still visible to archaeologists today. Everywhere people act, they alter chemistry. And everywhere chemistry lingers, geology remembers. The Silurian Hypothesis simply extends this logic. If we can detect Polynesian fires in soil, Roman lead in ice, nuclear isotopes in stone, then why not look deeper? If another civilization had burned, built, and vanished millions of years ago, these are the signs we would expect to find. Not temples or tools, but chemical scars. And in truth, we have already found scars. The Paleocene-Eocene warming, 56 million years ago, when the world abruptly heated by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. Carbon isotope ratios shifted suddenly, ecosystems collapsed, oceans acidified. It lasted 200,000 years. Volcanism and methane release are the leading explanations, but no one knows for sure. If you set aside assumptions, the event looks eerily familiar, like the spike we are creating today. There are others. Layers rich in metals that seem oddly concentrated. Sudden extinctions where species vanish faster than natural cycles predict. Abrupt climatic shifts that echo the speed of industrial disruption more than the pace of volcanoes or plate tectonics. Each has its natural explanation, and perhaps those are correct. But perhaps they are not. Sometimes the thought arrives in quiet places, not in ice fields or beaches, but in the hushed corridors of old libraries. Imagine sitting at a wooden desk, lamplight falling across pages of geological reports bound in leather. You run your finger over words written a century ago. Anomalous sample, unusual deposit. The scientist who wrote it never imagined a civilization older than ours. But what if the evidence was already before them, framed in ink, simply interpreted through too narrow a lens? Picture then a geologist in the far future, unearthing our layer. They see carbon spikes, plastic stones, radioactive isotopes. They debate among themselves. Was it volcanism? Was it chance? Or was it something else? They may never be certain, and now picture us today, standing over core samples from 50 million years ago, debating in the same way. The symmetry is unsettling. As you walk the frozen expanse of Greenland in your imagination, the drill still groaning in the distance, the air sharp with cold, the question presses closer. If fingerprints are what remain, then maybe the evidence is not missing at all. Maybe it has already been found, mislabeled, filed away and forgotten. The thought lingers like a shadow on the snow. Leave Greenland and the frozen ice cores behind. Now picture yourself in the shadow of a ruined forest, the trees tinged a sickly red. This is Chernobyl's Red Forest, the patch of woodland closest to the 1986 nuclear explosion. At the time of the blast, radiation levels were so high that pine trees turned crimson within days, needles scorched by invisible fire. Decades later, the forest has regrown, but it is not normal. The soil holds isotopes, the trees absorb them, and the ecosystem is bent by a disaster that lingers. Scientists call it a living fossil layer, a landscape that will carry radioactive fingerprints for tens of thousands of years. If Chernobyl is abandoned for long enough, those signatures could one day be pressed into stone, a faint scar marking the nuclear age. This is what the Silurian Hypothesis presses us to remember, that civilization leaves geology, not architecture. What we write into the earth is not the Eiffel Tower or the Great Wall, but chemical whispers like those in Chernobyl's soil. The same lesson reverberates from the seas. In August of 1883, the volcano Krakatoa erupted in Indonesia. The explosion was so loud that it was heard 3,000 miles away in Australia, and even across the Indian Ocean. It generated pressure waves that circled the globe 7 times. For years after, sunsets glowed blood red as volcanic ash scattered the sunlight. A poet in England described skies that looked aflame, inspiring paintings of fiery horizons. Today, those echoes remain not in memory but in layers of ash and sediments worldwide. A single event left a fingerprint visible both in the rocks and in the art of those who witnessed it. Such events remind us that our own traces will persist long after memory fades. Plastic beaches, nuclear isotopes, carbon spikes. All of these are not simply debris but geology in progress, and they force us to look backward with different eyes. What if similar fingerprints already exist in the rocks we've studied, but we've interpreted them as natural quirks? Imagine a vast archive room in a geological institute, shelves stacked high with rock cores drilled from deserts, mountains and seafloors. Each core is labelled, tagged and boxed. Most will never be studied again in detail. Somewhere in those shells may lie a fragment of something anomalous, an artificial alloy, a peculiar layer of fused material. but until someone looks closely, it will remain just another tube of stone collecting dust. The evidence of an earlier civilization, if it exists, may already be catalogued, mislabeled, and forgotten. Other hints in the deep past already trouble scientists. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, 56 million years ago, when Earth's climate spiked suddenly. Layers rich in carbon, abrupt warming, mass extinctions. Was it volcanoes? Methane hydrates? Or could it resemble in eerie detail the chemical scars of industry? Without context, the rocks only show the anomaly. Interpretation is left to us. The uncertainty grows sharper when we remember how much of Earth's surface is inaccessible. Oceanic crust, for instance, is constantly recycled by tectonic movement. Records older than 200 million years are erased as the seafloor sinks and melts. If civilizations ever thrived on ancient coasts, their ruins now lie miles beneath, reduced to magma. Mountains rise and crumble, rivers shift course, glaciers grind the land flat. Even on continents, the archive is always under revision. Speculation turns this silence into imagination. Picture an earlier society, millions of years ago, living along a coastline that no longer exists. Their cities stood where now there is only ocean. A catastrophe swept them away. Perhaps a flood basalt eruption. Perhaps an asteroid. When the seafloor carrying their remains subducted beneath the crust, their memory was erased as thoroughly as if it had never been. Only a faint chemical shadow lingers in stone, indistinguishable from natural cycles. Global echoes make the idea harder to dismiss. In the Sahara Desert, yellow glass lies scattered across dunes. For centuries nomads collected it, carving it into ornaments. A fragment was set in the funeral mask of Tutankhamun, glowing like captured sunlight. Only modern science revealed its true origin. A meteor exploded overhead, fusing sand into glass. What once seemed ordinary was extraordinary. Could the same be true for some stones already in our collections, assumed volcanic but truly something else? And then there are the anomalies that don't yet fit. Layers unusually rich in certain metals, sudden extinctions with no clear cause, climate shifts that move faster than natural processes should allow. Each one has a plausible explanation, but each one could also be reinterpreted. The unsettling part is that reinterpretation may never come. The rocks don't speak clearly, they only whisper. They give us data, and we shape it into stories. Today we tell those stories as volcanism, impact events, methane bursts. Tomorrow someone else may read them differently. The truth, if there is one, may always remain hidden. Think of a future geologist holding a plastiglomerate from our age. To them it may look like a curious blend of rock and glass. They might puzzle over its formation, debate whether it was natural or something stranger. They will never see the bottle it once was, or the net, or the child who drank from it. The story is gone, only the stone remains. Back in the red forest of Chernobyl, the wind moves through the pines. The needles are green again, but the soil below is poisoned. Generations from now, the forest may be gone, but its chemistry will remain. Someday, if no one remembers the explosion, a geologist might stand here and measure radiation in the soil. They would scratch their head, wondering what strange process left such a mark. That is the heart of the Silurian Hypothesis, the unsettling idea that we may already be standing on the evidence of others. It is simply that we do not yet know how to read it. And perhaps, as you leave the red forest in your mind's eye, stepping back into the wider world, the most haunting thought is this. The first fingerprints of earlier civilizations may not be buried deep in stone. They may already be in our hands, waiting for us to see them for what they are. Imagine yourself walking through a forest where the air is heavy with the smell of smoke. The trees are not green but blackened, their branches skeletal, their bark flaking like charcoal. The ground crunches underfoot, not with leaves but with ash. The silence is total. No bird calls, no insect hums, no rustle of small animals, just the brittle stillness of a world emptied. Now stretch that scene across the entire planet. This is what an extinction feels like. Not just the death of species, but the erasure of whole ecosystems. Forests vanish, oceans acidify, skies darken. What survives is reshaped into something new, and what is lost is not just life, but memory. Earth has endured 5 great extinction events, moments when the planet nearly reset itself. Each one is a reminder that life is fragile, and that even the most dominant creatures can vanish without a trace. The greatest of them all happened about 252 million years ago. Scientists call it the Permian-Triassic extinction, but more often it's simply the Great Dying. Over 90% of all species were wiped out. Imagine oceans turning into stagnant, suffocating pools. Imagine forests collapsing into deserts. Imagine skies filled with volcanic gases, acid rain hissing down on bare rock. For a time, fungi may have been the rulers of Earth, spreading across dead landscapes, feasting on decay. A whole planet turned into a compost heap. Geologists trace its cause to the Siberian Traps, a massive region of volcanic rock in Russia. For hundreds of thousands of years, lava poured out of fissures, releasing enough carbon dioxide to overheat the climate. Modern volcanologists walking across the jagged black plateaus describe it as a graveyard of fire, a frozen reminder of eruptions that went on longer than human civilization has yet existed. Picture standing there at the time, rivers of molten rock stretching to the horizon, choking smoke blotting out the sun, the ground trembling for centuries. It is hard to imagine anything surviving, and yet something did. Life crawled out of the wreckage, reshaped itself, and began again. But whatever lived before was erased so completely that we know it only through fossils and chemical traces. If a civilization had existed then, it would have been scoured away. Its cities would have been drowned in lava, its tools melted, its monuments crushed. Even its chemical fingerprints might have been swallowed in the flood of carbon and methane. The Earth would have reset the board, fast forward to 66 million years ago. You are standing in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The sun is bright, the air warm, the jungle alive with birds and insects. Then, without warning, the horizon flares. A rock 6 miles wide slams into the sea with the force of billions of nuclear bombs. The shockwave is instant. Forests ignite. Tidal waves higher than skyscrapers race outward. Dust and ash billow into the sky, turning day into night. For years, sunlight barely reaches the ground. Photosynthesis collapses. Dinosaurs, rulers of Earth for 160 million years, stumble and fall into extinction. The evidence is written in stone. A thin layer of clay rich in iridium, a metal rare on Earth but common in asteroids, lines the rocks around the world. In Gubbio, Italy, a geologist named Walter Alvarez first spotted the anomaly in the 1970s. His team measured the iridium and realized what it meant. Proof of a cataclysm from the sky. Picture him, kneeling in a limestone gorge, holding a chip of clay that contained the death of an empire of reptiles. One layer barely a centimetre thick, marking the end of an age. Again, ask the question, if a civilization had existed then, would we know? The impact would have levelled cities, vaporised artefacts, and left only that thin line of clay. Perhaps, if someone came after, they would see the spike in iridium and debate what it meant. But would they ever know who lived before the fire fell? Extinctions are not only ancient. In 1815, a mountain in Indonesia, Mount Tambora, erupted with such fury that it changed the climate of the entire world. The next year became known as the Year Without a Summer. Crops failed, skies dimmed, and famines spread across Europe, Asia, and North America. In Switzerland, a group of young writers trapped by the cold told ghost stories in a villa by Lake Geneva. One of them, Mary Shelley, began a tale about a man who stitched life together from the dead. Out of volcanic winter came Frankenstein. Human records preserved Tambora. But imagine if humanity had not been here to write it down. In 10,000 years, all that would remain would be ash in the soil, chemical traces in tree rings, and a thin band of volcanic rock. Without storytellers, it would look like a natural event stripped of its human weight. And sometimes, even with storytellers, the weight slips away. In the year 536 CE, chroniclers across the world recorded a strange phenomenon. The sun dimmed. In Constantinople, a Byzantine historian wrote that the light was pale and cold, like the moon. In China, officials noted yellow dust falling, like rain. In Ireland, monks recorded failed harvests and famine. One farmer, anonymous, is imagined standing in a field looking up at the sky. His crops are withered, his family hungry. He does not know that a volcanic eruption has veiled the sun. He only knows that the world feels broken. His story, like millions of others, vanished into silence. Only the chronicles and the chemistry of ice cores preserve the memory. Now follow the trail deeper, beneath forests and fields, into the abyssal plains of the ocean. Down here, light never reaches. Sediment falls like snow, slow and patient, building layers over millions of years. Each extinction is recorded as a subtle shift in those layers. A sudden dark band of organic carbon, a faint change in isotope ratios. To a geologist, these are signals of catastrophe. To the creatures that lived through them, they were nights of fire, years of hunger, skies of ash. What becomes clear is that extinction is not just the end of life, but the end of history. Each great dying resets the earth, erases context, and leaves the survivors to begin again. And if any civilizations rose before us, these events would not just have damaged them, they would have obliterated them. Extinctions are amnesia, written into stone. The further you peer into the fossil record, the clearer it becomes that extinction is not rare. It is routine, a pulse that beats through Earth's history, wiping the board clean at irregular intervals. For every species alive today, countless others were cut short by fire, flood, or ice. Consider the ice ages. Barely 20,000 years ago, glaciers stretched across continents, crushing forests and carving valleys into stone. Entire ecosystems disappeared under walls of ice. Now imagine those glaciers advancing not once but over and over again, cycles of freeze and thaw rewriting landscapes. Mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths once thrived across the northern world, but as climates swung, they vanished. Their bones remain, but their worlds, the forests, the plains, the songs of birds now extinct, are gone forever. Yet even smaller disasters ripple outward like echoes. In 536 CE, the haze that dimmed the sun sent famines across hemispheres. Crops failed, children starved, kings fell, and that was from a single eruption. Multiply that by the countless violent pulses Earth has endured, and you begin to see how fragile memory truly is. Global myths preserve some of these memories in metaphor. In Norse tradition, there is the Fimbul winter, a season of 3 unending years without sun, when snow buried the world and gods themselves prepared for their end. In Mesoamerica, Mayan chronicles speak of droughts so severe that cities emptied and temples fell silent. Across Polynesia, oral traditions remember islands swallowed by waves, lands sinking beneath the sea. Each is a story of collapse, transmuted into myth, a reminder that cultures record catastrophe in symbols long after details are forgotten. Step now into one of those temples yourself. Picture it. A ruined Maya pyramid, its stones split by roots, the jungle pressing in. Inside, carved glyphs speak of kings and gods, but also of hunger and drought. You can imagine a priest in the final days of that city hunched by torchlight, carving glyphs as the reservoirs dried and fields cracked. He did not know his words would outlive his people. He only knew that something must be recorded even if no one would read it. To him it was faith. To us it is archaeology. And yet, how many such stories have been lost when fire, flood, or time erased the stone entirely? The silence of extinction is cruel, not only because it erases life, but because it erases meaning. For scientists, extinctions are measured in percentages, in shifts of isotope ratios, in chemical spikes. But for those who lived through them, they were nights of hunger, skies gone dark, seas boiling with storm. Imagine an ancient astronomer staring at a dimmed sun, trying to scratch its meaning into clay. Imagine a mother watching her children fade in a winter without warmth. Those voices, if they ever existed, are gone. Only the stones remain, and the stones do not tell stories. They whisper numbers. Other myths echo the same silence. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a flood so vast it wiped away humanity, sparing only one man who built a great boat. In Hindu cosmology, there is the Pralaya, the great dissolution when the universe itself collapses into water, only to begin anew. In both, the theme is clear: cycles of erasure and rebirth. Whether inspired by real floods and droughts or born from imagination, the stories remind us of an older truth, that people have always sensed the world can be swept away, leaving only fragments behind, and sometimes those fragments are human. In April of 1815, Mount Tambora erupted in Indonesia. Ash darkened skies around the world. In Switzerland, Mary Shelley and her friends sat in a villa by Lake Geneva, watching storms blot the summer sky, inventing ghost stories in the cold. But far from the poets, the eruption left scars on ordinary people. In Java, villages were buried in ash. Survivors described the sky as orange at noon, the air thick and choking. Imagine a farmer stepping from his hut watching ash fall like snow, coating the fields that should have been green. For him, it was not myth or history, but a life collapsing in real time. His story, like millions of others, never reached parchment. It vanished, absorbed into the silence. Speculation presses further. What if an industrial society existed before us, millions of years ago, and met its end in catastrophe? A single asteroid could erase its infrastructure in a moment. A flood basalt eruption, like the Siberian traps, could bury its fingerprints under oceans of lava. Even its chemical scars could be drowned in the greater chaos of carbon and ash. If we did not know about dinosaurs, would we ever guess that such titans once ruled? If we did not know about earlier forests, would we ever imagine them? The same could be true of civilizations. Their erasure might be so complete that we confuse their last traces for the breath of volcanoes or the smoke of meteors. Now imagine a far future geologist, millions of years from today. They stand on a cliffside where layers of stone rise like stacked books. In their hand is a fragment chipped from a darker band. Inside, glittering veins shimmer in the sunlight, unusual, synthetic. They turn the fragment over, puzzled. Is it volcanic glass? An odd mineral impurity? Or is it something else? Perhaps they will debate it in their own journals, just as Walter Alvarez once debated the iridium layer in Gubbio. They may write papers, argue in conferences, split into camps of interpretation. But the truth, the living people behind that fragment, will remain forever silent. The ocean abyss adds its own weight to the story. On the seafloor, sediments fall grain by grain, building slow archives. Extinction events appear there as dark bands, sudden and sharp. Yet much of the seafloor is recycled, pulled into the mantle and erased. If civilizations thrived on coasts now long drowned, their ruins have been dragged under and melted. Even geology has amnesia. Extinction, then, is not only destruction, it is transformation. After the great dying, life began again, stranger and more diverse than before. After the asteroid, mammals rose in the silence left by reptiles. After the ice ages, humans spread into lands newly uncovered by retreating glaciers. Each ending was also a beginning, but always on a blank page. You stand again in the ruined temple, vines coiling around cracked walls. The carvings whisper of gods and storms, But the people are gone, their meanings lost. Outside, the jungle hums, alive and indifferent. Extinction is Earth's most ruthless act, and also its most creative. The cliffhanger is not a question, but a transformation. Extinction as silence, and silence as the soil from which life begins again. If others came before us, their stories may have ended in fire or ice, and if so, all that remains is absence, an absence we may one day join. Imagine a room lit by oil lamps. The walls are lined with shelves of clay tablets, each pressed with neat, wedge-shaped marks. The air is heavy with dust and ink. A scribe bends over his work, carefully pressing a stylus into wet clay. He does not know that thousands of years later archaeologists will unearth this tablet from the ruins of Nineveh and call it part of the Epic of Gilgamesh. For him, it is simply the story of a great flood, a tale passed down and believed, worth setting in clay so it will not be forgotten. The story he writes tells of Utnapishtim, warned by the gods of a flood that would sweep away humanity. He builds a boat, loads it with animals, and survives as waters cover the world. When the flood recedes, life begins again. To modern readers, it sounds uncannily like another tale, the story of Noah, told thousands of years later in the Hebrew Scriptures. Both describe waters rising, a chosen survivor, and the renewal of the world after devastation. Two cultures, separated in time, writing the same catastrophe into eternity. What are we to make of that? Coincidence? Shared imagination? Or are these myths distorted echoes of something real? A flood so vast it impressed itself upon human memory, retold again and again until it became legend. The further you look, the more such echoes appear. In Hindu cosmology, there is the story of Pralaya, the great dissolution, when the universe itself collapses into water. During Pralaya, mountains sink, stars vanish, and all creation is submerged in endless sea, waiting for the next cycle to begin. Like Gilgamesh, like Noah, it is a tale of waters rising and worlds ending. Except here, it is not just humanity, but the entire cosmos that drowns, only to be reborn. Travel across the Pacific and the pattern continues. In Polynesian traditions, sailors told of islands swallowed by the sea. Some legends say it happened quickly, the land vanishing beneath storm and wave. Others describe it slowly, shorelines creeping inward until villages were forced to abandon their homes. Oral traditions across the Pacific remember such stories, sometimes linking them to real places. Scholars debate whether they are memories of rising seas after the Ice Age or simple allegory. But to the people who tell them, they are warnings carved into story. Even in the Americas, native peoples preserve tales of great floods. Among the Hopi, there is the story of an earlier world drowned because of human folly, leaving only survivors who escaped to high ground. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs spoke of previous suns, or ages, destroyed by flood, fire and earthquake before the current one. Across cultures the theme repeats, water rising, worlds lost, beginnings carved out of endings. Step back and notice the pattern. Why do cultures oceans apart, with no direct contact, tell stories of waters that swallow the land? Why do they all remember survivors, boats, renewal? Scholars argue that floods are a universal human fear. Rivers overflowing, storms battering coasts, tsunamis striking without warning. But there is another possibility. What if these myths are not just fear, but memory? What if humanity carries fragments of real catastrophes, passed down through oral traditions so long they blurred into legend? Imagine for a moment a family in Mesopotamia watching the Tigris rise. The river floods its banks, homes vanish, the horizon becomes water. To them, it feels as though the world itself is ending. They tell the story to their children. The children grow old, tell it to their children, and so on. Each retelling magnifies it, lifts it from history into myth. Centuries later, a scribe sets it into clay, and thousands of years later we read it, The flood becomes more than an event, it becomes a symbol. But speculation presses further. What if some of these stories are not just memories of ordinary floods, but of extraordinary ones? As the last ice age ended, sea levels rose by more than 100 metres. Coastlines shrank, islands disappeared, vast stretches of land were swallowed. If ancient peoples built villages along those coasts, their homes would have vanished beneath the rising seas. Imagine watching your world drown, inch by inch, year by year. You would tell your children, they would tell theirs, and in time, it would become myth. Could Atlantis itself be such a memory? Plato described it not as fantasy, but as history passed down by Egyptian priests. A mighty island civilization drowned in a single night and day of catastrophe. Scholars treat it as allegory, but perhaps it was simply one version of the same memory, of land lost to the sea, retold with grandeur. In the flicker of lamplight, the Babylonian scribe continues pressing clay. He cannot know that Polynesian sailors, thousands of miles away, are telling children by firelight of islands swallowed by waves. He cannot know that Hindus will one day write of Pralaya, or that Hebrews will carve the story of Noah into scripture. He only knows that the flood was real enough to preserve, real enough to be carried forward. Now shift the setting. Imagine yourself not in a library, but on a canoe in the Pacific centuries ago. The stars above guide the sailors, the ocean heaves around you. An elder sits in the stern, telling the story of a land long lost. His voice is quiet, almost drowned by the waves. The children listen, wide-eyed, as he describes an island that vanished beneath the sea. For him, it is not myth, but memory, carried through generations. The ocean itself seems to hold its breath as he speaks, and you realise as you listen that these myths are more than imagination. They are maps of memory. They are fossils of story, just as real in their way as bones pressed into stone. The cliffhanger does not end with an answer, but with a reframe. Myths may be the last voices of forgotten catastrophes. If others lived before us, if civilizations were swallowed by sea or sky, perhaps these stories are their only surviving trace. Now imagine a different setting. Not a library of tablets, but a stone temple half buried in snow. A Norse skald stands before a fire, his breath misting in the cold air. Around him, villagers listen, wrapped in furs. He tells of the Fimble winter, 3 unending winters, when the sun gives no warmth and the world is covered in snow. Crops fail, wolves roam, and even the gods prepare for their end. The listeners shiver, not just from cold, but from recognition. In a land where harsh winters are common, the idea of endless night feels possible, even inevitable. The story continues into Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. Fires consume the world, giants stride across battlefields, seas boil, and the sun itself is swallowed. Yet even in this ending, the skald promises renewal. After destruction, a new earth will rise from the sea, green and fertile again. The myth is not just despair, it is also hope, that even in endings there are beginnings. Step away from Scandinavia and cross the ocean to the temples of the Aztecs. Here, priests carved into stone the belief in the 5 suns, the cycles of creation and destruction. According to their legends, 4 worlds had existed before ours, each destroyed in turn. One by jaguars, another by wind, another by fire, another by flood. We live, they said, in the 5th sun, destined to end someday. Imagine the weight of that worldview, to believe your entire world was temporary, just one chapter in an endless series of deaths and rebirths. Now travel to ancient India, where the great epics tell of weapons wielded by gods. In the Mahabharata, there are passages describing what sound eerily like explosions of unimaginable power. A single projectile charged with all the power in the universe, it says, an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns. Warriors are described as blinded, their hair and nails falling out, birds falling dead from the sky. To many, these are simply metaphors of divine wrath. But to modern readers, they sound unsettlingly like descriptions of radiation, fallout, and blast waves. Were these pure imagination, or distorted memories of something real, volcanic eruptions, comet impacts, or perhaps something stranger? Meanwhile, in China, chronicles record a different kind of apocalypse, the years when the sun dimmed. In 536 CE, scribes wrote of skies without light, of yellow dust falling like rain. Crops withered, famines spread. The chronicles are clinical, factual, yet their tone carries the dread of people watching the world falter. To them, it must have felt like a myth unfolding in real time, though they did not call it that. Even in North America, traditions recall the sky darkening. Some native peoples tell of great fires that once swept the land, of ash that covered the sky, of cold summers when little grew. These stories may well be rooted in real volcanic events or wildfires, but like the others, they blend history with symbolism. Picture yourself now in a cave deep underground. A fire burns, throwing shadows on the walls. Figures are painted there: bison, hunters, handprints. But perhaps among them are also symbols we do not understand: spirals, suns, floods, waves of fire. An elder speaks, his voice carrying a story that has been told 100 times. Children listen, their faces flickering in the firelight. The story is about the sky turning black, about the land burning, about the need to remember. The elder does not know geology. He only knows memory. And so the story becomes myth, carried through time like an ember. These myths of fire and darkness all share a rhythm. A great catastrophe comes, endless winter, fire from the sky, floods of ash. The world collapses, and then, after silence, something new emerges. They are not just stories of endings, but of cycles. Death, rebirth, death again. The pattern mirrors geology itself, with its extinctions and renewals, its blank pages followed by fresh chapters. Speculation stretches wider. What if myths like these are not only allegories, but distorted memories of real catastrophes? Fimbulwinter could be rooted in volcanic winters, like the one after Tambora in 1815 or the dim sun of 536. The Aztec Five Suns could be cultural memory of earlier societies collapsing under fire, flood and famine. The Hindu epics might contain echoes of real disasters, volcanic eruptions, comet impacts, perhaps even ancient warfare long forgotten. And further still, what if some myths are not just human memory, but whispers of civilizations lost before recorded history? Imagine if a society thousands of years earlier faced annihilation by comet or eruption. The survivors, scattered and broken, might carry fragments of the story forward. Over time, those fragments would become allegory, stripped of detail but carrying the truth of destruction. By the time they reached us, they would be myth. Think again of the skald in the frozen temple, of the priest carving cycles of suns, of the scribe in China recording a dim sun. Each in their way is preserving memory of catastrophe. And in their words, separated by oceans and centuries, the same pattern emerges. Worlds ending, darkness falling, fire consuming, life beginning again. You step out of the cave into the night sky. The stars are bright, the air crisp. But in your mind, the stories linger. Fire, flood, darkness. Myths that might be metaphors, or might be fossils of memory, fragile yet enduring. The cliffhanger does not answer, but reframes. If myths are echoes of memory, then perhaps they are also the only evidence we have of worlds erased. And if that is true, then every story told by firelight may be more than a tale. It may be a survival of something too vast, too ancient, too real to otherwise endure. Picture a scholar's study in Athens more than 2,000 years ago. The air is cool, the walls lined with scrolls. Plato sits at a desk, his stylus scratching across a wax tablet. He's not writing philosophy tonight, but recounting a story said to have come from Egypt. Priests there told of a great island civilization called Atlantis, rich and powerful, whose people grew arrogant and were punished by the gods. In a single day and night the island was swallowed by the sea. Plato does not claim to invent the story. He records it as history, though with allegorical meaning. For him, Atlantis is a lesson about hubris. Yet ever since, readers have wondered, was he only teaching a moral? Or was he recording a memory, faint but real, of land drowned by catastrophe? Centuries later, sailors crossing the Atlantic whispered of strange shapes beneath the water, of ruins glimpsed in the deep. Cartographers drew islands on maps that later vanished, phantom lands reported by navigators. Some swore that Atlantis was real, that echoes of its greatness lingered. Even today, expeditions search the seabed, chasing Plato's words across the ocean floor. Atlantis is not alone. In the 19th century, naturalists proposed the existence of Lemuria, a lost continent in the Indian Ocean, meant to explain similarities in flora and fauna between Madagascar and India. Though science has since explained those connections through plate tectonics, the name Lemuria stuck in the imagination. Writers and mystics reimagined it as a forgotten civilization, sunk beneath the sea. Whether real or not, it joined Atlantis in the chorus of lost lands. Farther east, Tibetan and Indian traditions speak of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom said to exist in the mountains, untouched by time. Unlike Atlantis or Lemuria, Shambhala is not drowned but concealed, waiting to be revealed when the world is ready. Travellers in the 19th and 20th centuries searched the Himalayas for it, blending myth with geography. Some believed it a spiritual realm, others a memory of a real society hidden away. Either way, it represents the same human longing, that there are places we've forgotten, but that remain. In the Americas, conquistadors heard of El Dorado, the Golden City. Some said it was ruled by a king who covered himself in gold dust before bathing in a sacred lake. Others swore it was a metropolis of unimaginable wealth hidden in the jungle. Expeditions hacked their way through forests, crossed mountains, and vanished in search of it. They never found El Dorado, but their failures only deepened the myth. The jungles of South America, with their ruined temples and abandoned cities swallowed by vines, seemed to whisper that somewhere deeper, the Golden City still waited. The pattern repeats: Atlantis, Lemuria, Shambhala, El Dorado. Each is a story of a place lost, hidden, or drowned. Each hints that what we see is only part of the world, that greater things lie beyond reach. Speculation threads through them like current. What if these stories are not mere imagination, but distorted memories of real places destroyed or forgotten? As the Ice Age ended, seas rose and coastlines vanished. Villages, even cities, could have been drowned. Survivors might have carried those memories, retelling them as myths of islands swallowed by the ocean. Plato's Atlantis, Polynesian sinking islands, even flood myths worldwide could all be echoes of the same truth. That land is not eternal, and memory is fragile. Picture now a storm-tossed ship in the 16th century. Sailors cling to ropes as waves crash. Below deck, a navigator studies maps by candlelight. He whispers to his crewmates of islands that appear and vanish, of lands glimpsed on clear days and gone the next. To him, the ocean is alive, swallowing and revealing, hiding stories beneath its surface. When he returns home, he tells of lands that cannot be found again. To his listeners, they sound like fables. To him, they were real. Centuries later, a Victorian explorer hacks through jungle vines in Central America. The air is heavy with humidity. The calls of unseen birds echo through the canopy. He stumbles into a clearing and stops. Before him rise stone pyramids, carved with glyphs, overgrown with roots. He is stunned. Here is proof that great cities once existed in jungles thought empty. What else, he wonders, waits to be found? If these cities were forgotten, why not others? Why not entire civilizations lost to time? And now, shift to the present. Imagine a researcher in a quiet office, surrounded by books and glowing computer screens. She's compiling myths from every continent, placing them side by side. Floods in Mesopotamia, floods in Polynesia, floods in the Americas, fires in Norse myth, fires in Hindu epic, lost lands in Greece, India, and South America. She notices the patterns, the repetition, the echoes. She leans back in her chair and wonders, what if these are not coincidences but evidence of a memory deeper than history? Fragments of civilizations erased so long ago that only stories remain. Speculation pushes further. Could myths be the only fossils of forgotten worlds? Rocks preserve bones, ice preserves gases, but only story preserves memory. A myth might be the last voice of a people who lived before us, carried forward in symbols and parables, its meaning distorted but not destroyed. Imagine again Plato scratching the word Atlantis into his tablet. Imagine the Aztec priest, the Polynesian navigator, the Tibetan monk. Each, in their own way, is recording something they believe must not be forgotten, and though their worlds are gone, their words remain. Myths endure when empires fall. Myths carry whispers across centuries. You stand now in the ruins of a jungle city. The air is thick with vines, the stones warm in the sun. Around you are carvings of gods and kings, their faces weathered but still watching. The people who built this place are gone, their names lost, but their stories are still here, carved into walls and whispered in legends. The cliffhanger is not a question but a reflection. Perhaps myths are not just stories at all. Perhaps they are the last voices of forgotten civilizations, fragments of memory echoing across time. If others came before us, erased by fire, flood, or ice, then maybe this is all that remains of them. Not tools or ruins, but stories carried like embers, still glowing in the dark. The sun beats down on a patch of desert. A team of archaeologists crouch in shallow trenches, brushes in hand, carefully sweeping sand away from the curve of a pot, the outline of a stone foundation. Around them, tents flap in the wind, notes are scribbled, photographs taken. To the casual eye, the site looks like empty ground. Only after weeks of digging does it begin to reveal its secrets: fragments of clay, beads of bone, faint discolorations in soil where posts once stood. From scraps like these, whole histories are reconstructed. It is humbling to realise how little survives. Entire societies are often known to us from nothing more than pottery shards or a handful of tools. Whole languages are guessed at from single inscriptions. The Library of Ashurbanipal, rediscovered in the 19th century, revealed thousands of cuneiform tablets, yet it represents only a sliver of Mesopotamian thought. For every library preserved in clay, how many were lost to fire or rot? For every temple uncovered, how many lie under modern cities or beneath rivers or ground into dust by glaciers? Archaeology operates in a fragile window of time, the last 10,000, perhaps 20,000 years. Beyond that, the record grows thin, fragmented, nearly silent. Stone endures, clay endures, but wood, fabric and flesh vanish almost immediately. Even great monuments can disappear. Forests reclaim them, sands bury them, floods erase them. To look at a dig site is to remember how much can be lost, and how little needs to survive for us to tell stories about a people. Consider the story of Troy. For centuries, Troy was known only from Homer's epics, poems many scholars dismissed as legend. A city of heroes, gods and wars too fantastical to believe. Then, in the 19th century, Heinrich Schliemann set out with shovel and determination. Against the scepticism of his peers, he dug into a hill in modern Turkey and found layers of ancient city walls. Beneath centuries of soil lay proof that Troy had been real, not as Homer described, but real nonetheless. A myth had led to archaeology, and archaeology had vindicated a story. Or think of Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. For decades, villagers ploughed fields atop a low hill, never realising what lay beneath. In the 1990s, excavations revealed towering stone pillars carved with animals arranged in circles, a temple complex built over 11,000 years ago, long before cities or agriculture as we knew them. Its existence rewrote the story of human civilization. Until then, we thought temples followed farming, but Göbekli Tepe showed the opposite. Perhaps religion and story came first, pulling people together to build, farm and settle. One site, hidden under dirt for millennia, overturned centuries of assumptions. If Troy and Göbekli Tepe could be forgotten for a few thousand years, how much more could be lost in millions? Our time is a flicker compared to the scale of geology. Archaeology can glimpse only the uppermost layers of history, the last thin skin of human presence. Beneath that, deeper in the strata, lies silence. Even in that silence there are clues. Soil can hold the faint chemical traces of ancient hearths, the phosphorus from long-decayed waste, the charcoal from forgotten fires. Fields that once grew crops can leave patterns still visible from the air, ghost outlines of vanished villages. Yet all of this is fragile, a flood, a landslide, the slow march of erosion, and the evidence is gone. What remains is chance. A buried wall here, a sealed cave there, an archive of clay tablets hardened in fire. Speculation stretches further. If we can miss entire civilizations in 10,000 years, what chance do we have of finding one from 10 million? If myths led Schliemann to Troy, what other myths might be waiting for rediscovery? Their truths hidden under layers of skepticism and soil. What if stories of Atlantis or Lemuria, so easily dismissed, one day lead us to ruins in the deep ocean? What if Göbekli Tepe is not an anomaly, but a clue that memory runs deeper than we think? The archaeologists in the desert pause as a pot fragment emerges from the sand. They tag it, log it, and place it in a padded box. To most, it looks like nothing more than a broken piece of clay. But to them, it is priceless. The voice of someone long gone, speaking across millennia. It is a reminder that history is not written only in books, but in fragments, in whispers, in the dust. And if that is true, then perhaps the greatest lesson of archaeology is humility. We do not know the full story of the past. We know only what survived, what we happened to find, and what we knew how to interpret. Whole worlds may lie beneath our feet, erased by time, waiting for someone bold enough, or lucky enough, to uncover them. The silence of archaeology is not empty, it is potential, and it invites the question. If forgotten evidence lies just a few feet below the surface of our world, what might lie deeper still, beneath the strata of millions of years? Imagine standing on the banks of the Indus River 4,000 years ago. Before you stretches the city of Mohenjo-Daro, streets laid out in careful grids, wells dug into courtyards, drains carrying waste away. This was the Indus Valley civilization, vast, sophisticated and thriving. Yet for centuries the world forgot it existed. By the time archaeologists rediscovered it in the 20th century, all that remained were mounds of brick and silent ruins. A whole civilization, larger than ancient Egypt, erased from memory until chance and excavation revealed it again. Cross the world to North America, and you find another silence. Along the Mississippi River, the city of Cahokia once rose, its population swelling to tens of thousands. Earthen mounds towered over the floodplains, plazas bustled with trade, ceremonies echoed across wooden palisades. Yet when Europeans arrived centuries later, Cahokia was gone. Its mounds lay overgrown, its people scattered, its story reduced to fragments of pottery and tools. Without archaeology, Cahokia might still be dismissed as a myth. Even now, its people's name for themselves is unknown. These are not anomalies. Again and again, history shows us that civilizations vanish, not just physically, but from memory. The Mayan cities of Central America lay hidden beneath jungles for centuries, their glyphs unread until scholars cracked the code. The Hittite Empire, once powerful in the Near East, was forgotten so completely that scholars thought references to it in the Bible were fictional, until inscriptions were found in Turkey proving it real. The pattern repeats: empires rise, flourish and fall, and unless something survives, a tablet, a wall, a mound, they vanish. Even when evidence survives, it often decays faster than we realise. Cities built of wood disappear within decades if abandoned. Metals corrode. Roads crumble under plants. In humid jungles, whole towns can vanish in less than a century. Chernobyl, abandoned in 1986, is already being reclaimed by forest. If humanity left tomorrow, most of our buildings would be gone within 1,000 years. Concrete would crumble, glass would shatter, steel would rust. Only stone and chemistry would remain. This raises the question, if our evidence is so fragile, how much more fragile would the evidence of any civilization millions of years older be? Archaeology cannot reach that deep. Its tools are designed for the Holocene, not the deep past. Beyond a thin slice of time, everything is geology, stone layers, isotope ratios, mineral veins. The boundary between archaeology and geology is not just a matter of method. It is a gulf of millions of years, and yet even within archaeology's short reach, the surprises are profound. Schliemann's Troy proved myths could point to real places. Göbekli Tepe pushed organised religion back thousands of years. Mohenjo-Daro and Cahokia showed us that great cities could be forgotten almost completely. If these discoveries reshaped history from only a few millennia ago, what unknowns wait deeper still? Consider the metaphor of archaeology as a flashlight in a cave. The cave is vast, filled with chambers and passages stretching beyond sight. The flashlight beam is narrow, catching fragments, a pot, a wall, a shard of bone. From those glimpses we construct stories of the whole, but the vast majority of the cave remains in shadow. We do not know what lies beyond the reach of our light. This is not a failure of archaeology. It is its nature. Evidence is fragile, memory is fragile. And so, even in the shallowest layers of time, we see how much can vanish. Step back once more to the desert dig. The archaeologists close their notebooks, pack their finds, and leave the site. Wind sweeps across the trenches, slowly filling them in. In a few months, the desert will cover their work again, hiding the outlines of walls and hearths. The city that once stood here will remain a ghost, waiting for another team, another flashlight, another attempt to piece together the story. The cliffhanger is not a mystery but an image. Archaeology as light, history as shadow, and the overwhelming reminder that what we know is only a fraction of what has ever been. And if we can lose so much in 10,000 years, then what of 10 million? What of 100 million? If others came before, their stories are not just buried, they are drowned in silence, waiting for us to imagine them. The room is cold, the hum of machines constant. A scientist leans over a steel table, where a long cylinder of sediment lies in front of her. It is a core drilled from the ocean floor raised from 3 miles below. To the eye it looks ordinary, bands of grey, black and pale brown. But to the scientist each band is a page in Earth's diary. She slices a section thin, places it under a microscope and begins to read. This is how we glimpse the past. Not through monuments or texts, but through chemistry frozen in time. Each band of sediment contains signals. The dust of volcanoes, the bloom of algae, the soot of fires, the tiny shells of creatures long extinct. When measured carefully, these signals tell us what the air was like, what the oceans carried, even what burned on the land above. The core becomes a book, and chemistry the ink. At sea, the process is even more dramatic. Picture a research vessel drifting over the abyssal plains. Winches creak as cables unwind, lowering drills into the deep. Hours later, A clattering core barrel rises from the waves, dripping with seawater and mud. Scientists rush to slice it open, revealing stripes of sediment laid down grain by grain over millions of years. Somewhere in those stripes might be the record of extinction, climate change, or, if the Silurian Hypothesis is right, civilization. The most obvious markers are isotopes. Carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen leave signatures when burned, shifted, or altered. Already, human industry has spiked carbon isotope ratios so sharply that future geologists will see our age as a jagged scar. Long after our cities crumble, the chemistry will remain. A spike of light carbon from burning fossil fuels layered into stone. To someone millions of years from now, it will look abrupt, unnatural, like an exclamation point in the record. But it is not only carbon. Nitrogen from fertilizer runoff is already altering rivers and oceans, leaving chemical shadows in sediments. Oxygen ratios shift with warming seas. Even lead pollution from ancient Rome left its fingerprint in Greenland's ice, and radioactive isotopes released during the nuclear age are so distinct that they will shine in the record for tens of thousands of years. A future geologist will see them instantly, a thin band of strangeness across the stone. Already we use these same methods to search for civilizations beyond Earth. When astronomers study exoplanets, they look for atmospheric chemistry out of balance, oxygen too high, methane too persistent, carbon dioxide rising in strange rhythms. These are treated as possible biosignatures, or even technosignatures. The logic is simple. Life and civilization alter chemistry. But if we apply that logic to other planets, why not to our own? If an earlier civilization lived here, their presence might also be preserved as a chemical scar, detectable not by ruins but by isotopes. History offers glimpses of how subtle those scars can be. In the 1950s, during the Cold War, isotope labs around the world measured rainfall, tracking the spread of nuclear fallout. Scientists in white coats logged spikes of cesium and strontium, surprised at how far they travelled, falling as dust on distant islands and polar ice. Today, those same isotopes are still measurable in cores and soils, a ghost of geopolitics turned into geology. Other scars are even stranger. On Hawaiian beaches, researchers discovered plastiglomerates, rocks fused with plastic, sand, and volcanic glass. Holding one under the light, a scientist noted how it gleamed with unnatural colours. Already, these are being buried in sediments. In millions of years, they may appear as curious stones in cliffs, puzzling geologists who debate their origin. Are they volcanic oddities, or something else? Without context, they could be misread. Speculation presses further. What if some anomalies we already know, abrupt warming events, sudden chemical spikes, are not purely natural? 56 million years ago, during the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, carbon levels surged and temperatures spiked, ecosystems collapsed, oceans acidified, species vanished. Volcanoes and methane are leading explanations, but the pattern resembles our own industrial signature. What if, just faintly, it is the echo of someone before us? The thought unsettles because it requires humility. We are used to thinking of ourselves as unique, the first to alter the earth so drastically. But the rocks may tell a different story, one of cycles, of civilizations rising, burning and vanishing, leaving behind only isotope whispers. The scientist in the cold lab lifts her head from the microscope. On her screen, a graph glows with a sharp spike in carbon ratios. It is from the 20th century, unmistakable. She jots it down, knowing it will remain long after her notes are forgotten. Outside, the core lies in sections, each labelled, each a chapter of Earth's vast book. Somewhere in those bands may be not just our story, but the faintest traces of stories erased before ours began. The cliffhanger is not a revelation, but a question turned inward. What if we are not reading the rocks for the first time, but rereading them, blind to the voices already written there? The search for forgotten civilizations is not conducted with shovels alone. It unfolds in laboratories, aboard ships, and in frozen camps where science listens to the Earth in ways almost mystical. Picture a drilling ship anchored over the Atlantic. Waves slap against its hull as a long pipe descends into the abyss. When the pipe finally returns, it brings with it a slender core of mud and sand, a record layered grain by grain over millions of years. Scientists crowd around as the cylinder is split, its bands as distinct as tree rings. Here is the ash of an ancient eruption. Here, the dark smear of an extinction. And here, perhaps, an anomaly. A band too sudden, too sharp, too strange to be natural. Elsewhere, in the silence of Antarctica, teams bore into the ice. The wind screams across the white, tents flap against the cold, and in insulated labs, technicians melt slivers of ice to capture bubbles of ancient air. Those bubbles tell of changing atmospheres, of forests breathing and collapsing, of volcanic winters and warming seas. In them, too, are faint signals of industry, the lead of Roman smelters, the soot of medieval forges, the surge of carbon from our own time. One day, perhaps, someone will drill deeper still and find a bubble that does not fit, an atmosphere altered long before us. Chemistry is only part of the hunt. Metals leave their own peculiar trails. Modern industry has scattered aluminum, copper, and rare alloys across the world in concentrations far beyond natural levels. Future geologists will see them instantly, glittering in the record. Already we see echoes in reverse, traces of heavy metals where they should not be. In Greenland's ice, scientists found a lead spike from Roman mining. In the Sahara, fields of yellow-green glass once puzzled travellers until science revealed their cause, a meteor explosion that fused sand into glass sheets. To the ancients, they were mysterious treasures. To us, they are reminders that extraordinary events leave permanent marks. The challenge is not whether evidence exists, it is whether we know how to interpret it. When Tutankhamun's mask was first studied, no one knew that the gleaming yellow stone set in its brow was desert glass. For centuries, scholars misread it, assuming it was ordinary. Only in the 20th century did we realise it was created by cosmic fire. How many other specimens sit mislabelled in drawers, misunderstood because we lack the right context? The Silurian Hypothesis suggests that the same misreading may already have happened. A core sample labelled volcanic anomaly could be the scar of industry. A band of carbon assumed to be methane could be the echo of combustion. Without perspective, the rocks can be read in many ways. Only hindsight gives clarity, and we may not yet have enough of it. Speculation pushes further. Imagine a civilization that burned fuel not unlike ours, altering isotopes. Millions of years later, we find the spike, debate its meaning, and assign it to volcanoes or clathrate release. We nod, satisfied, unaware that we have already touched the fingerprint of others and dismissed it. This is the haunting suggestion, not that the evidence is missing, but that it has been seen and misunderstood. Instruments become our oracles in this search. Mass spectrometers hum softly in sealed rooms, their readings precise to a fraction of a percent. A scientist peers at a graph, watching lines rise and fall, each peak a whisper of past chemistry. Seismographs trace the pulse of the Earth, mapping layers invisible to the eye. Satellite sensors scan the ground for patterns, geometric alignments hinting at ruins beneath jungle or desert. Each machine translates the silence of stone into language we can almost read. But like oracles, the instruments speak in riddles. A spike could be fuel. It could be volcanoes. A glassy stone could be technology, or a meteor. The ambiguity is maddening, yet it is also the point. Science is not certainty, but interpretation, and interpretation can shift. The same data can be a natural disaster in one century, and in another, the echo of forgotten civilization. Consider again the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. The data shows a spike in carbon isotopes, a sudden warming, oceans turning sour. Most say it was volcanism or methane, but a small voice asks, could it be industry? Could it be someone else? The data does not decide for us. It waits for us to choose a story. And what of anomalies we have not yet looked for? Plastiglomerates are new in the record now. But could there be older, stranger hybrids we've misclassified? Radioactive isotopes from our own age will glow in stone for hundreds of millennia. Could another layer of unnatural isotopes buried deep be hidden among natural deposits? What if we have already walked past the proof, stored it in museums, filed it away as oddities, and moved on? The ship at sea pulls another core from the abyss. The scientists split it, mark it, measure it. They whisper about anomalies, write reports, debate in journals. Far away, in a frozen lab, a technician watches a mass spectrometer trace a line across paper. The line curves, dips, spikes. She circles it with her pen. It means something. Perhaps not what she thinks, not yet, but something. The cliffhanger is not loud but quiet, fitting for this chapter. The rocks are already speaking. The instruments already record their whispers. The question is whether we will learn to hear what they are truly saying. Imagine holding a rock in your hand. To you it is just a grey, heavy thing, scratched and ordinary. But to a geologist it is a time capsule, formed under heat, pressed under weight, marked by tiny inclusions that speak of conditions long vanished. And yet, even a geologist admits the truth. Rocks are imperfect storytellers. They preserve some things faithfully, but erase others without mercy. The Earth is a restless archivist. Its shelves are constantly reordered, its pages recycled. Oceanic crust is pulled back into the mantle every 200 million years or so. Mountains rise and grind to dust. Rivers shift, glaciers scour, deserts bury and uncover. The result is that most of Earth's past is gone. Entire chapters, perhaps entire civilizations, could be erased by the planet's ceaseless editing. Picture a graduate student late at night in a university basement. The fluorescent light flickers as she examines a specimen drawer filled with core samples taken decades earlier. The labels are smudged, the handwriting faded. She turns over a rock, an odd blend of fused material, half volcanic glass, half something stranger. She makes a note, puzzled, then files it back. For her, it is just a curiosity. For someone else, years later, it may be the key to a mystery. Evidence can be right in front of us, waiting for someone to recognize it. This fragility is the heart of the Silurian Hypothesis. If we can barely preserve and interpret our own record, what chance do we have of detecting a civilization erased millions of years ago? Archaeology works in millennia. Geology works in eons. The scale of erasure is staggering. Even great monuments can disappear in the blink of geological time. Think of the city of Alexandria's great library, destroyed by fire. Thousands of works lost in a single blaze. Now stretch that across continents. Whole libraries, whole cities, whole societies consumed not by fire but by tectonics, erosion, or flood. Even now we misplace history within living memory. If we can lose so much in 2,000 years, what of 2 million? At sea, the silence is sharper. Picture an oceanographer standing on the deck of a research vessel at night. The stars are bright overhead, the water black and endless. Below him, the ship drifts over trenches 6 miles deep, where sediments have fallen for tens of millions of years. Down there, the layers hold the record of extinctions, of climates shifting, of oceans breathing. But only a few boreholes have ever sampled those depths. Vast swathes remain untouched, silent archives we have never read. Somewhere below, a thin layer might already hold evidence. A spike, a scar, a whisper of someone before. But unless we drill the right spot, it will remain unread. Even on land, evidence slips away. Rain eats at stone, wind grinds it smooth, plants split it apart. In jungles, a city can vanish in a century, swallowed whole. In deserts, sand buries, then shifts again, revealing and concealing in cycles. The earth is not static, it is dynamic, alive. Its constant motion is what makes it beautiful, and what makes it forget. Speculation stretches further. Imagine a city built on a coastline 50 million years ago. Its people farmed, wrote, built, lived. Then the seas rose, drowned the city, and plate tectonics carried its ruins downward. Today, that coastline is magma, recycled, erased completely. No trace survives. Or imagine a society in a valley later scoured by glaciers. Stone ground flat, evidence pulverized. To us, it would be as though it never existed. Even the best preserved sites we know are fragile. Fossil beds survive only under rare conditions: quick burial, mineralization, protection from erosion. How many others have been lost? The fossil record is not a full chorus. It is a whisper. A few voices survive, most are silenced. Civilizations, being more fragile than bones, would be even easier to erase. And yet, there are reminders in the present that we are not as good at preservation as we think. In museums and archives across the world, artifacts sit mislabeled, samples gather dust, cores lie unread. Even today, with satellite sensors and supercomputers, we overlook what is right in front of us. Perhaps the real danger is not that the evidence is gone, but that we're too distracted to recognize it. That is where the foreshadowing begins. Because perhaps the real question is not only whether others came before us, but what it would mean if we are the first. If Earth's deep past is silent, then our story is the only one. And if so, what responsibility does that place on us, knowing how fragile memory really is? The oceanographer on the night deck glances at the glowing monitors, listening to the hum of instruments as they chart the sea floor. The grad student closes the drawer, leaving the odd rock in its place. The Earth continues to turn, restless, erasing and rewriting itself. Somewhere in that process, stories have been lost, and perhaps one day ours will be too. The cliffhanger does not give an answer. It leaves a reminder. The Earth forgets, and when it forgets completely. Stand on the edge of a mountain range. The peaks are jagged, sharp against the sky, but they are not eternal. Rain eats at them. Wind carries their dust away grain by grain. Rivers carve valleys deeper each year. What looks unchanging in a lifetime is only a pause in a process of endless erasure. Geologists tell us the Appalachians were once as tall as the Himalayas. Now they're worn down to soft ridges, their grandeur long ground into soil. If mountains vanish, what chance does a city have? Erosion is relentless. In deserts, sand drifts bury and reveal ruins, never preserving them for long. In jungles, roots and vines consume stone, breaking temples into rubble within centuries. Even the pyramids, the most enduring monuments we know, are scarred, eroded, crumbling. 1,000 years from now they will look different. 10,000 years, and perhaps they will be hills. 100,000 years, and they may be gone. For civilizations built of wood, clay, or metal, the time scale of disappearance is even shorter. Beneath our feet, tectonics does its own work. The continents themselves are restless. Oceanic crust is dragged under continents and melted in the mantle. Sediments deposited at sea are folded, tilted, and erased. Whole coastlines vanish. Whatever was built there is swallowed, irretrievable. Even on land, earthquakes split foundations. Volcanoes bury landscapes. Glaciers grind valleys flat. The Earth is not a safe archive. It is a restless one, rewriting constantly. Picture a hiker stumbling across a stone circle on a hillside. To her, it is an odd arrangement of rocks. To archaeologists, it might be the remains of a settlement or a ritual site. But if that hillside eroded a little faster, or if a glacier once passed over it, even that circle would be gone. The survival of evidence is not inevitable. It is fragile, almost miraculous. There are lessons in the record we do have. The dinosaurs ruled Earth for over 160 million years, yet we know them from fragments, bones in stone, teeth, footprints. What if a civilization lasted only 1 million years or even less? Would we expect to find more than a trace? And if their traces were erased by tectonics or erosion, would we even know they had lived? Even extinction erases evidence. When the Chicxulub impact struck 66 million years ago, forests burned, oceans acidified, climates shifted. Whatever lived then was silent so completely that only a thin layer of iridium remains as proof. The Permian extinction, far older, wiped out nearly all life. The signatures are chemical, not cultural. If a civilization had existed then, its ruins would have been swallowed by the far greater chaos of planetary reset. Speculation sharpens the point. Imagine a society of builders thriving 50 million years ago. Their monuments stood on coastal plains. Their metals gleamed in markets. Their libraries filled with words. Then came fire, basalt floods, ash skies, oceans rising. Within centuries their cities drowned or crumbled. Within millennia their metals rusted, their stones eroded. Within millions of years their continents shifted, their coasts abducted, their memory erased. In the fossil record, perhaps only a chemical spike remains. To us it looks like volcanism. To them it was the end of everything. And so, we return to the fragility of our own memory. Even today, entire cultures are known only from fragments. The Etruscans left art, but most of their writings are gone. The Olmec left colossal heads, but little else. The Harappan script remains undeciphered, its words silent. If we struggle with societies only thousands of years old, how much more impossible would it be to reconstruct 1 millions of years lost? This is where the foreshadowing grows clearer. Because perhaps the question is not just whether earlier civilizations existed, but whether their absence should remind us of our own impermanence. If the Earth forgets even empires, what will it make of ours? Picture now a data center, its servers humming in the dark. Vast archives of human knowledge stored on fragile drives, magnetic patterns, invisible code. A century without power, and it is all gone. The information age would vanish faster than a library of clay tablets. What would survive of us would not be our words, but our chemistry. Our carbon spike, our plastics, our isotopes. Our story reduced to a thin line in stone. The hiker descends from the hillside. The oceanographer walks the deck of his ship. The graduate student closes her specimen drawer. Each of them plays a part in piecing together fragments, yet all of them know the truth. The fragments are incomplete, and most of the record is already gone. The cliffhanger does not ask whether we will endure. It plants the seed of reflection. If the Earth erases almost everything, then what truly matters may not be what is preserved, but how we live before the silence comes. The desert is quiet again. The horizon glows with the last light of day, the sand cooling beneath your feet, the air turning crisp as the sun slips away. You hear nothing but the wind moving across dunes, carrying with it the faint smell of dust and stone. It feels timeless here, as though nothing has changed in 1 million years. Yet beneath your feet lies the record of change, written grain by grain. We began this journey in a place like this, where the silence of the desert mirrored the silence of Earth's deep time. Now we return, not because deserts alone hold secrets, but because they remind us of what endures and what does not. Sand shifts, dunes collapse, oases dry and reappear. To walk across this landscape is to walk across the edge of memory. The Earth remembers some things. It remembers trilobites pressed into stone. It remembers forests fossilized into coal. It remembers the shock of an asteroid as a thin line of iridium in cliffs. But it forgets almost everything else. Civilizations vanish. Languages vanish. Entire worlds vanish. until only whispers remain. Picture yourself crouching down in the fading light, brushing your hand across the sand. Beneath the surface might lie a shard of pottery, a fragment of bone, a tool made by someone who once lived here. To you it is a curiosity. To an archaeologist it is a treasure. To the earth it is nothing. Just another grain to be buried, weathered and erased. The desert does not care who held it, what stories it carried. It will bury it just the same, and yet, even in that erasure, there is meaning. For every shard uncovered, every fossil pulled from stone, every core drilled from the sea, we are reminded of how fragile memory is, and how extraordinary it is when anything survives at all. That a Mayan glyph can still speak, that a cuneiform tablet can still be read, that a Roman spike in Greenland's ice can still be measured. These are miracles against the odds. Perhaps that is the real story. Not whether a civilization before us lived and was erased, but how much of anything survives at all. The Earth is not a perfect archive. It is an imperfect one, and its silences are louder than its words. Now think of the people we've glimpsed along the way. The Babylonian scribe pressing clay tablets in lamplight, the Polynesian elder telling children of islands lost to the sea, the Norse skald reciting tales of Fimble winter by a fire, the Mayan priest carving glyphs as drought closed in, the Roman smelters blackening the air, the scientist bending over a core sample in a sterile lab, the oceanographer on a night deck staring into the abyss, the grad student puzzled by a strange rock in a drawer. Each one, in their own way, has tried to preserve something, to hold against silence, and yet, even their efforts may not last. Fires destroy libraries, time erodes inscriptions, specimens are mislabeled and forgotten, data fades on drives. The work of generations can vanish in a single accident, a single oversight, a single flood. Memory itself is precarious. That is why we listen so carefully to the earth, even when its language is faint, because we know how easily we are lost. Here, in the desert under the darkening sky, you realize that perhaps the Silurian Hypothesis is not only about whether others came before us. Perhaps it is also about us. If civilizations rise and vanish, erased by fire, flood, or time, then what does it mean that we are here now, fragile and temporary, adding our own layer to the stone? Foreshadowing lingers in that thought. Perhaps the question is not whether they existed, but what it means if we are truly the first, or truly the last. The wind picks up. Stars emerge one by one, sharp against the fading blue. The desert shifts into night, and with it, the earth seems to draw closer, as if listening. You feel small here, but not insignificant. You are reminded that everything you know, your life, your culture, your world, is already being written into stone, whether you realize it or not. The cliffhanger is not an ending, but a pause. The desert holds its breath, and you wonder, not whether others lived before, but what story we are leaving behind and whether anyone will ever read it. The desert fades behind you, and now you stand at the edge of the ocean. Waves roll in beneath the moonlight, silver and endless. Each one collapses with a hiss, erasing the line of the last. The rhythm feels eternal. Advance, retreat, advance, retreat. Like memory itself, washing away most of what it once touched. The ocean has been both cradle and grave for civilizations. It swallowed coastal villages after the Ice Age. It drowned cities whose names we may never know. And yet, it also carried explorers outward, scattering myths and stories across the world. Picture a Polynesian navigator steering his canoe by the stars. The horizon is featureless water, yet he knows where he is by reading the sky, the flight of birds, the taste of salt on the wind. In his memory are stories of islands lost to the sea, lands that sank beneath waves. For him, the ocean is not only a road, but a reminder that nothing stays forever, and even land can vanish. His story joins the chorus of flood myths that whisper of erasure. Now lift your gaze higher. The stars above are the same stars that guided those navigators, the same ones that inspired myths in every culture. To the Aztecs they were gods, to the Greeks constellations, to the Chinese patterns of harmony. For all of them, the stars were not just light but story. In the 17th century, Galileo lifted a small telescope toward the sky and sketched the moons of Jupiter. With trembling lines of ink he shattered an older universe, showing that Earth was not the centre but one world among many. In that moment humanity's perspective expanded. If Earth was not the centre, then perhaps its stories too were not unique. Perhaps civilizations rise elsewhere, vanish elsewhere, written into stone or ice far beyond our sight. 4 centuries later, astronauts looked back at Earth from orbit. One described it as a pale blue marble, fragile against the black. Another called it a fragile oasis, alone in space. From that vantage, all of our myths, all our ruins, all our science compressed into a single glowing sphere. Seen from space, the question of whether others came before us becomes smaller and yet larger at once. Smaller, because Earth itself is a brief flicker in a vast cosmos. Larger, because if civilizations are rare, then ours is infinitely more precious. Speculation presses further. If others lived here before, erased by time, then their story is gone, written only in silence. If no others lived here, then we are the first, a thought both exhilarating and terrifying. To be first means we carry a burden. If the record of Earth is fragile, if the rocks forget, then perhaps it is not only about preservation, but about responsibility. Even now, in the present day, we misplace our own memory. Museums hold mislabeled specimens. Hard drives fail. Libraries burn. We dismiss anomalies because they do not fit our models. We argue over stories, over meanings, while the silence beneath us grows larger. If we cannot preserve even a few centuries perfectly, how can we expect to endure across millions of years? And yet, there is hope in humility. The ocean erases, but it also carries. The stars remind us of our smallness, but also of our connection. Galileo's ink lines still survive. Polynesian traditions are still sung. The astronaut's words are still quoted. Against the silence, fragments endure. Perhaps that is all any civilization can hope for. Not to last forever, but to leave whispers strong enough that someone, someday, might hear them. Standing at the shore, waves lapping at your feet, you realize the Silurian Hypothesis is less about them and more about us. It is a mirror. It asks not only, were there others, but what will remain of us? And if the answer is almost nothing, then the greater question is, what story do we want those fragments to tell? The cliffhanger is not an ending, but an opening. As the ocean pulls back into darkness, you look up at the stars and understand that whether or not there were others, our story is already flowing outward, fragile and unfinished, waiting to be read, if not by successors, then by silence itself. The desert at night is colder than you expect. The heat of the day has fled, leaving only cool air and silence. Above, the stars burn bright, sharper than in any city sky. They hang there like ancient lanterns, watching, unchanged. You tilt your head back and see the Milky Way stretching across the black, a river of light older than humanity itself. In this stillness, the questions that have followed us across this story return once more, quieter now but heavier. The dunes whisper under the wind, and you remember the others we have walked beside. The scribe in his library, pressing clay tablets by lamplight. The Polynesian navigator, steering by constellations. The Norse skald, his voice echoing in a hall of timber. The Mayan priest, torchlight flickering on stone as he carved glyphs into walls. The explorer stumbling into ruins, vines hanging heavy. The scientist bent over a microscope, tracing lines of carbon on a graph. Each of them tried, in their own way, to hold on to something against silence. Each of them is gone, but fragments of their voices remain. And this is the pattern. The Earth keeps fragments, but it does not keep everything. It is a forgetful archivist, preserving trilobites, but not their seas, pyramids, but not the hands that raised them, isotopes, but not the stories behind them. It does not care about meaning. It does not care about us. And yet, it is the only archive we have. Perhaps in the end, that is the lesson of the Silurian hypothesis. Not simply whether others came before us, though that mystery lingers, unsolved. But that memory is fragile, and the record incomplete. If they existed, they are silent now, erased by flood and fire and time. If they did not, then we are alone in carrying the weight of civilization. Either way, the conclusion is the same. Everything is temporary. Picture now an astronaut far from Earth, looking back at the pale blue dot suspended in black. To them the world looks small, delicate, fleeting. They cannot see the ruins, the myths, the isotopes. They see only light and cloud and ocean. All of human history, all of our struggles compressed into a single point. From that distance, it is easy to imagine that others once looked back at their own worlds, wondering the same questions. Speculation becomes reflection. If we are the first, then we carry responsibility to endure longer than stone or ice alone. If we are the last, then our silence will be final, and no myths will remain to carry us forward. And if we are only one of many, then perhaps we are part of a chorus of civilizations, each rising and falling, each leaving fragments, each forgotten in turn. The desert night is vast, but not empty. The stars blaze with their own stories, each one a sun, perhaps with its own worlds, its own myths, its own silences. Looking up, you realize the Silurian hypothesis is not only about the Earth. It is about humility, the knowledge that we may not be unique, and the awareness that even if we are, our time is brief. You close your eyes, listening to the wind push sand against stone. You think of the archaeologist with her brush, the navigator with his stars, the scientist with her core, the storyteller with his myth. They are all part of the same thread, fragile voices carried forward against forgetting, and now so are we. The closing is not definitive because it cannot be. The Earth does not give clear answers. It only gives whispers, fragments, echoes. Perhaps we are the first, perhaps we are the last, perhaps we are just another story being written into stone. The silence deepens, the stars shimmer, and the desert seems to lean closer. And in that moment you understand, whether others came before or not, we are already a memory in the making, fragile, unfinished, waiting to be read by someone else, or by no one at all.